O God, may your spirit and guidance be in us as we work for the benefit of all our people, for peace and justice in our land, and for the constant recognition of the dignity and aspirations of those whom we serve. Amen.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome back to the Legislative Assembly. With the easing of COVID-19 restrictions, we have returned to our usual chamber setup and operations. Our gallery is open to the public. We are able to increase the number of interpreters here. We'll be providing interpretation into Chipewyan, Tlicho, North Slave, South Slave, Inuvik, and French this sitting. Please join me in thanking our interpreters for their dedication and important work they do in preserving, strengthening, and honoring our official languages. Colleagues, we have removed the extra tables from the chamber. You have returned to your normal seats, and I am pleased to welcome pages back to the chamber. And it is an honor to share this space with our youth. They are our future. Please join me in welcoming our pages back. Merci. Not only are we welcoming youth into this chamber as pages for this sitting, but we also recently hosted our 18th Youth Parliament. I know many of you have had the opportunity to meet our youth parliamentarians. Many of you volunteered your time to serve as pages during our youth parliament session, or watched online or from the gallery. It was wonderful to hear our youth read their members' and minister statements and to move and debate motions on topics for which they clearly had great interest and passion. It was also exciting to hear them speak our official languages. Colleagues, I want to congratulate and thank Kobe Ilanik, who represented the Mackenzie Delta and served as speaker for our youth parliament. You did a great job. I was honored to have you take my chair. The youth are our future, and based on what we've seen and heard during the 18th Youth Parliament, I am confident our future is in good hands. Colleagues, as you know, the territory has experienced flooding again this spring. I know many people have been affected by the flooding, especially in Sambake, Katladechi First Nations, West Point First Nation, and here. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the hard work of the leaders and staff people who have been working tirelessly to help the affected residents. I also know that other communities, including the Klavik, are currently preparing for possible flooding. I want to thank the community leaders for the efforts they are making to prepare for and minimize the impacts of any flooding that may occur. We are resilient people who help each other during times of need. That's part of what makes the Northwest Territories such a wonderful place to call home. Finally, I would like to thank the Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall for their recent visit to the Northwest Territories during their recent Canadian tour. I know that some of you had the opportunity to meet the Prince and Duchess while they were here, and I know that many people in N.W.T and YELLOWKNIFE were honored and excited to have had the opportunity to host such important guests. Now, colleagues, it is my duty to advise the House that I have received the following message from the Commissioner of the Northwest Territories. It reads, "Dear Mr. Speaker, I wish to advise that I recommend the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories the passage of Supplementary Appropriations Act Infrastructure Expenditure Number 1, 2022-2023, and Supplementary Appropriations Act Operation Expenditure Number 1, 2022-2023 during the second session of the 19th Legislative Assembly. Yours truly, Margaret M. Tom, Commissioner. Thank you, colleagues. Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister responsible for municipal and community affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to begin by saying that I along with several of my cabinet colleagues, have the privilege of visiting both the town of Hay River, N.W.T First Nation, and West Point First Nation early this week to observe the damage caused by this year's flooding in the South Slave region. I want to thank Mayor Jamieson and Chief Martel for inviting and hosting us on our tours around your communities. Also, thanks also to MLAs Bonnaroo and both MLA Simpsons for accompanying us and demonstrating leadership for your communities. It was eye-opening to see the hundreds of homes, businesses, and other infrastructure that have been damaged and in some cases lost to the flood. For many residents, the cleanup work is just beginning, and from the conversations I had with many people on the ground, I know they understand that full recovery will be a long and exhausting process. I want residents to know the Government of Northwest Territories is here to assist you and your communities with this recovery work. Municipal and community affairs staff are already on the ground and meeting with residents to discuss their needs, provide support, and are working diligently to assess the damage to every home, business, building, and property. Mr. Speaker, today I also want to speak about the collaborative action that was taken by hundreds of people over the past few weeks to help those affected by this flood. During this unimaginable difficult days, we have seen examples of residents or neighbors helping neighbors and communities helping communities. From the absolute heroic efforts of residents who risk their own safety to rescue others from the floodwaters, and to those who have gone above and beyond to provide care and comfort to evacuees. I want to recognize the contribution made by so many residents to help those in need. I would also like to thank the communities of Enterprise, Fort Providence, Fort Resolution, Fort Smith, and Yellowknife for all their work in making a very difficult time a little bit easier for evacuees. I would also like to thank all the people, businesses, and organizations who made donations of time, goods, food, and money to the residents of the affected communities. I visited the evacuation center in Yellowknife several times and heard nothing but deep appreciation for the generous contribution. And I also know that this was the case in the evacuation centers in other communities as well. Mr. Speaker, communities are the front line for emergency management. I want to acknowledge the quick and effective response of the town of Hay River and N.W.T First Nation. The leadership shown by Mayor and the Chief and their team, as well as their local emergency management organizations, made a critical difference in responding to such a large-scale disaster event. Lessons learned from the 2021 flood season helped us to be more prepared for this year. The Department of Municipal and Community Affairs launched a Be Ready campaign before the start of spring breakup this year. This campaign provided residents and community government with information on preparedness, flood risk, and disaster assistance. It included printable checklists, links to flood readiness videos, guidance about what to do when you're going home, and how to navigate disaster assistance. The disaster assistance policy was updated to better support those affected by disasters. Eligibility for disaster assistance was expanded to include non-profit organizations, commercial hunters, trappers, and other harvesters of natural resources. The maximum amount of assistance has increased from 80% to 90% of eligible cost, and the total payable amount available to residents, small businesses, and non-profit has increased from $100,000 to $240,000. Under the new policy, the maximum payable amount has been removed entirely for the community governments. We're also in the process of enhancing our emergency management team, having more staff in our regional offices and in headquarters to work closely with community governments and residents, helping everyone to prepare for and respond to and recover from natural disasters. The recovery work requires after a flood of this magnitude will take time, and we're asking your patience as our government continues to work or continues to support the ongoing recovery efforts. To the residents in the affected communities, we know this has been an extraordinary difficult time for you and your family. I want you to know that our government will continue to work hard with your community governments to ensure that you remain safe and have the support you need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister statements. Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to advise the House that the Honourable Caroline Cochrane will be absent from the House for today and tomorrow to attend the Western Premiers Conference in Saskatchewan. Queen Annie, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Deputy Premier. Minister statements. Minister statements. Member statements. Member for Decho.
Mr. Speaker and colleagues, welcome back to the House. Mr. Speaker, Wednesday, May 11th, 2022 will be a day many residents of N.W.T First Nation and the town of Hay River will remember for a long time. The water levels of the Hay River had been consistently rising during the day and into the evening. Chief April Martel had posted a Facebook video showing the water levels creeping inland at the community arbor area. It had come in about 1,000 feet inland from the arbor, and the arbor is close to the riverbank. Water was affecting many homes near the riverbanks. It was in fact moving some houses and mini sheds, and numerous items that were strewn throughout many yards. The KFN fire chief pulled the fire siren to warn of an immediate evacuation of all residents of KFN. This was at approximately 11 o'clock at night. Darkness was already setting in, and the chief was the last to leave the reserve. Chief April Martel is a young woman leader and showed great resolve to ensure the safety of her membership. She is to be commended for her actions. Chief April Martel, being modest, wishes to thank the many KFN residents who stepped up to assist in any way to ensure many of the residents, including the elderly, were out of harm's way. Fire Chief Michael Sunrise and Assistant Fire Chief Derek Fabian for sounding the alarm. This in fact was heard by many on the Newtown side and warned them of impending danger. The safety of the Den and Wellness Center was compromised due to its proximity to the river and rising waters and rushing ice, which were crashing and breaking the trees on the riverbank. Many of the residents with vehicles assisted to move everyone to the safety of the hamlet of Enterprise and to other communities. Many had not slept all night, including the chief, who was concerned for her membership's well-being. Many volunteers stayed to man a truck stop into the reserve where they had set up a couple of campers. I, along with the chief of the N.W.T First Nations, send sincere appreciation and many thanks to all surrounding communities who put up KFN members and provided assistance and food. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement. Masi.
Thank you, Member for Decho. The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude a statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Masi, Mr. Speaker, and Masi colleagues. Masi Cho to the N.W.T for their swift actions in securing accommodations and meals for many of the evacuees of this devastating flood. Masi Cho to Fort Resolution, Fort Smith, Enterprise, Fort Providence, YELLOWKNIFE, and Hay River. Masi, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Decho. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I want to say I'm glad to be back in the House to be able to represent constituents of Inuvik. and also want to give my condolences and to my thoughts and prayers to all of those who are affected by the floods, and thinking of the families in Acknowledgements that are watching the water now as well. As a resident of Inuvik for pretty much my entire life, the only way out by road is the Dempster Highway. This 740-kilometer gravel highway from Inuvik to the Dawson corner is our lifeline for our basic needs like food, heating fuel, building supplies. When the residents of the Northwest Territories drive this highway from my community and from my region, it is not for leisure travel for the most part. It is used to harvest and to make the journey to Whitehorse or further south for supplies. The N.W.T. Yukon border to Inuvik is 272 kilometers, and over the past 3 decades, since I can remember driving up and down that road myself, the road to the border has continuously been worked on and widened. When driving this highway, beginning from the Yukon, you first cross a single-lane wooden bridge, which impacts what can come up this highway. We are in a housing crisis, and modular homes and manufacturers' homes are one way to try alleviate this crisis, but we can't even truck anything wider than 14 feet up that road, which are not common sizes for modulars any longer. Over the last couple years, I've traveled this road, especially when returning home from session. This is a 3-day travel for myself and my husband when we do travel. This road is at the end of its life once you hit the Dempster. It hasn't been widened until you hit the N.W.T. Yukon border. The N.W.T. has been advocating for funding from the feds for over the years to widen the N.W.T. section of the highway, but it appears to me that this is not a Yukon priority to advocate for their side, as it does not lead to any of their communities. So the road remains narrow with little or no gravel to cover the remainder of this 468 kilometers from the N.W.T. border, which is in dire need of repair. And I'm sure the Speaker and some members in this House have traveled that road as well. When I asked the previous Minister of Infrastructure about the Dempster Highway, she replied to me in this House on Friday, June 12, 2020. I have lots of conversations with my counterpart in the Yukon, who is also very keen to see the Dempster rehabilitated, and we have discussed that with the federal government. I sure hope that this minister, who I know travels this road, as she too is from the Beaufort Delta, has continued to have these discussions with our Yukon neighbour to push the federal government for funds to repair and rehabilitate the 468-kilometre section through the Yukon and the single-lane bridge, as well as other bridges that need repair. I will have questions for the minister responsible for infrastructure on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also would like to welcome back all our colleagues. It's nice to be sitting again in such nice weather. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the last session in March, the N.W.T. Power Corporation had submitted an interim rate application to increase the power rates in the Tulsan zone, 10% in the first year and another 10% in the second year in electricity rates. Thankfully, the N.W.T. Public Utilities Board is the neutral body that determines rate increases in the N.W.T. And they decided to increase power rates by 2.5% in all communities and regions in the N.W.T. Mr. Speaker, for NTPC attempting to single out the Tulsan zone with a 10% increase in both years in power is not okay, especially for Fort Smith, where the Tulsan Dam is situated in and around the traditional lands of multiple First Nations and Métis people. I don't believe it is right to increase the power rates to such a high amount for people whose traditional territory is where the dam sits. Mr. Speaker, last month the Premier and Cabinet visited Fort Smith, and at every meeting they went to, the power rate increases were front and centre as a main concern for the constituents. Everyone in Fort Smith was opposed to a 10% increase in power rates, including the town, the Salt River First Nation, the Fort Smith Métis Council, and the Fort Smith Senior Society, among others. In fact, the town of Fort Smith, along with the town of Haver River, sent a jointly written letter to the Public Utilities Board, urging them not to disproportionately burden residents in the Tulsan zone with a 10% power rate increase. There was also a private Fort Smith business who sent a written submission to the Public Utilities Board voicing similar concerns about the rates. Ultimately, Mr. Speaker, NCPC only wants power rates increased because they are experiencing a shortfall in revenues. So they need more money to cover the various costs of providing electricity across the N.W.T. According to a 2012 report on the cost pressures of NCPC, the Tolson Dam generates between 5 and 8 megawatts of surplus energy each year. So, what is the NCPC doing with all the surplus electricity? Surplus power has got to be used more efficiently and effectively by NCPC so they can be in a better financial position in order to prevent an increase in costs onto the consumer. We have the surplus of power, yet no innovation to better harness and utilize it. Mr. Speaker, with the increasing costs of living and the historic levels of inflation we're experiencing, it is extremely important that our government continues to find positive solutions to ensure that the people of the NW can make ends meet on all their household bills, including electricity. I will have questions for the minister responsible for NCPC at the appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, homes, businesses, and infrastructure in the town of Hay River, N.W.T, West Point First Nation, along with a home in Enterprise and one at Riverwoods subdivision, were severely impacted by flooding, with what may well be unprecedented levels of ice and water for the area. Mr. Speaker, I would like to acknowledge the effort and action by the Hay River Emergency Measures Organization for the work they did to ensure all residents were evacuated safely with no loss of life. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the EMO, it is important to recognize the many individuals and businesses who provided financial support, food, clothing, equipment, fuel, accommodations, transportation, and for that support, I say thank you. We must also recognize the hamlet of Enterprise, town of Fort Smith, hamlet of Fort Providence, hamlet of Fort Resolution, the city of Yellowknife, and others who opened up their communities and provided temporary accommodation, meals, and other support to the many evacuees, their families, and pets during this stressful time. Mr. Speaker, this event was the perfect storm. In addition to large amounts of ice and high water levels throughout the Hay River watershed, we had snow, freezing temperatures, and a nighttime evacuation, all which contributed to the making for a dangerous event. The devastation and extent of damage was not limited to ice and water, but that of sewer backups, loss of access to potable water and electricity. Mr. Speaker, to really comprehend the extent of damage, one had to see it in real time, and most importantly, listen to the stories of those who were impacted. Mr. Speaker, the effects of this flood is just setting in as residents now have time to reflect on the aftermath. I have spoken to many residents who are appreciative of the quick deployment of pathfinders and assessors by municipal and community affairs. However, those who have submitted applications under the disaster assistance policy and had their property assessed are now asking, what is next in this process? For those that have completely lost their homes due to extensive flood damage are concerned that the changes to the policy, while a move in the right direction, is not indicative of real replacement costs of homes. In the past 2 years, the cost of labor and material has risen considerably. Mr. Speaker, when it is costing this government well over $500,000 to deliver new public housing units, the $240,000 is inadequate, deficient, and an insult to those who find themselves with limited negotiating power and now may well need a mortgage to rebuild. Mr. Speaker, I will have questions for the Minister of MAC at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Hay River South. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Yellowknife North. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every once in a while in this House, I like to plagiarize a statement from one of my former predecessors. Partly because, a lot of the issues in this House require consistent advocacy, and sometimes you just can't say it better yourself. And today, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to deliver a statement from my predecessor, Jadens White of Youth Parliament, the member for Yellowknife North, who did a great job in this House, and I believe that statement bears repeating. Mr. Speaker, there is a climate crisis in the world. The government of the Northwest Territories was one of the first in Canada to include climate change considerations in high-level decision-making. Despite this, no considerable action has been made towards a solution. This is a subject that many worry about. Seasons are changing, winters are becoming shorter, and summers are reaching temperature records. In August of 2021, Yellowknife hit its record for the highest temperature of 32.6 degrees Celsius. Mr. Speaker, public image seems to be more important to those in power rather than a healthy, sustainable future. Former N.W.T staff reported leaving their positions due to a lack of support and feeling burnt out from their hard efforts not making a difference. We need to look at the big picture, prioritize and support staff that are passionate and qualified in climate change. More action is needed. This should be a top concern. We need to secure a viable future for everyone. Mr. Speaker, there is no sugarcoating this. Substantive action must be taken. This could be done through creating more bike lanes, creating incentive programs for residents to reduce vehicle traffic, and having more sources of renewable power. We need to save our Earth before it's too late. We still have time to make a difference, but action must be taken now. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank Jadens White for her great advocacy in the Yellowknife North role, and I will have questions today for the Minister of Infrastructure as they relate to our work on climate change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife North. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, growing up in the North, I was never interested in politics. My view was antiquated with visions of smoke-filled back rooms full of white-haired men talking about things that didn't include me. But they did, and they do. The conversations in those rooms speak to health, safety, dignity, and potential. And as I have aged, I realize that who is having the conversation is just as important as the conversation itself. This May, the Legislative Assembly's Youth Parliament provided a week-long glimpse of territorial politics, the role of consensus government, and responsibility of representing a constituency. 19 N.W.T youth now have a much different view of politics than I once had. My view today is centered on gratitude, rooted in hope, and inspired by vision for stronger communities and being prepared to do the work to get there. No one better embodies the honesty and integrity of politics than our youth. Our youth parliamentarians stood in this very room and called for housing solutions, treatment options, and an affordable and sustainable North. Cam Lake was well represented by École St. Patrick High School student Aisha Jah, who spoke about the N.W.T's rising cost of living. The ideas and debates were entrenched in care with a get-her-done attitude that doesn't see surmountable barriers. The N.W.T's youth parliamentarians pushed buzz and energy through the halls of the Legislative Assembly, reminding us that our children are powerful. In my school days, Angela Masongsong was the student voice for Students Against Drinking and Driving before the torch was passed to Candace Meadis. After, I think of LGBTQIPA+ rights champion Jack Brasseur, and more recently climate change advocate Ella Cacao. These voices changed legislation, drove budgets, and yes, inspired a room of today's leaders. Today I think of the youth voices that shared their living experience with the Standing Committee on Social Development as part of our Child and Family Services review. Youth remind us the question is not if, but how. Our pleasure of standing in this room is short, Mr. Speaker, but our impact isn't, and we must never take that for granted. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the N.W.T youth who share their voices in this House, in our communities, and in the work we do. We respect your courage, we value your input, and the opportunity to learn from you. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to thank you and your staff who continue to provide this experience to our territory's youngest changemakers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Cam Lake. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Frame Lake.
I have to confess, I think there's some white hair up there somewhere, but on April 22nd, 2022, the public and regular MLAs finally got to hear from the Minister for Mining and her staff about the development of mining regulations to implement the Mineral Resources Act. There were more than a few surprises, including the very short timeline for public engagement, which was set for May to July of this year. Not much, if anything, has happened since that meeting. The public have a couple more months to weigh in on such hefty matters as how and when it might get notified of mineral staking and development, what benefits we might get and how enforceable they may be, whether we will capture more if not all the geoscience from exploration, and much more. It is right that industry has been engaged since at least January, but others who have an interest should also be there. For example, on royalties, the first item being discussed in those secret meetings with industry was transparency and confidentiality. Surely we can do better than that with the N.W.T engagement on development of the mining regulations. The Minister has said that her department has done research to support the development of the mining regulations, and that apparently includes a $24,000 contract to 2 former ITI employees on map staking finished in July 2021, a $100,000 contract to a law firm for dispute resolution expertise, and another contract for $200,000 to the University of Calgary for ongoing policy advice that began in March 2022. Advice on engagement was removed from the scope of the last contract for unknown reasons. Unfortunately, the Minister has yet to share any of this work with regular MLAs, let alone the public, despite the ever-decreasing window for input. When committee met with the Minister, members of the Intergovernmental Council Secretariat were there, but not part of the team making the presentation or answering questions. I think it would have been much more productive if they'd been able to participate. There is a commitment to publicly post at least 5 sets of draft mining regulations for some period of comment, but it is not clear whether there will be any response to issues or concerns raised. Of course, the Minister or Cabinet is not required to carry out any public engagement for regulations, but the Mineral Resources Act is only a shell and leaves all of the authority to regulations and the Executive. I'll have questions for the Mining Minister on the less than ideal process for public and MLA engagement on the development of these important mining regulations. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a regular member, I've repeatedly asked the Minister of Health about the state of our residents' mental health and the supports available to them. And time again, the Minister has denied what is blatantly obvious to most residents of this territory, that we are in a mental health crisis. Mr. Speaker, the issues facing this territory and the deeply ingrained trauma experienced by our people is not going to go away by logging on to some app or calling a crisis line. People need real supports that include in-person counseling, culturally appropriate programming, aftercare, and actual physical spaces in which people can detox from drugs or alcohol or flee from domestic violence situations. Last session, the Minister's response to my question, "I feel confident that we're not facing anything that we can't deal with," shows how out of touch with reality this Minister is. In fact, so much so, her comments prompted the Native Women's Association of the N.W.T to write a letter calling out her disconnect and the harm created by her dismissive comments. They expressed that they were appalled and dismayed. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, I agree with them. As the Native Women's Association pointed out, and I have stated numerous times in this chamber, COVID-19 has compounded the mental health crisis in the North, with increasing rates of homelessness, addiction, suicide, violence, depression, and incarceration. Intergenerational trauma and the pandemic have created a double burden that is overwhelming our people's ability to deal with it. And although the Minister of Health and Social Services has yet to acknowledge that there is a mental health crisis occurring in the N.W.T, it is obvious to me that the first crucial step to addressing this crisis is adequate and safe housing. There is an invisible homeless population in the territory of people who are couch surfing, staying in relationships of convenience, or remaining in places that are unsuitable or unsafe for themselves and their families just to keep a roof over their heads. When I speak with these people, they always express a concern for their ability to stay sober while having nowhere to call home. For many, there's a loss of pride, a loss of connection to their culture and families, just from the inability to host them in their homes. Others struggle with health concerns and conditions only made worse by their lack of stable housing. Mr. Speaker, acknowledging a problem is the first step to finding its solution. And since the Minister of Health refuses to acknowledge what is in front of her eyes, I'm going to take my questions to the Minister of Housing and urge her to help our vulnerable people. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Mumfui.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I'm going to do, with permission, I am going to do eulogy for Dan Marion, Mr. Daniel Marion of Bichico. Mr. Speaker, Cleacher people have known Dan for many, many, many years. Dan was always there to give advice on any topic, such as business issues, employment issues, social, technical truck problems, and many more. Dan always had time for you and showed that he really cared about your welfare. When you shared a problem with Dan, his reply always pointed to a solution that was beneficial to all. Dan was a great advocate for the aspirations of youth. He admired young people as store workers, truck drivers, gave out scholarships money for students that were going to be pursuing higher educations, and other positions and important life lessons in the best way of providing the best service to customers and clients. He developed the capabilities of young people and gave them skills and attitudes that served them well in their future. Dan emphasized the good feeling a person gets with a job well done. He was an astute businessman in operating rigs, trucking, and guiding the Cleacher Investment Corporation for the first critical years. His Facebook posts, these past few months showed great appreciation of family, friends, and importance of helping those in need. He talked about the meaning of life and profound grief of losing someone dear. Dan enhanced many of our lives, and his example of life well lived will be felt well into the future. This is a Dan Marion that we knew, and we always knew him as a Kawikawa store manager in our region, Cleacher region. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Mumfui. Our thoughts and prayers are with the community at this time. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I have the honor of saying thank you to a resident who is retiring. Mike Canny started working at the Fort Simpson warehouse on April 4th, 1986 with the federal government as a casual. The following year, he started with the Department of Renewable Resources as a seasonal store person. In 1991, he was asked to fill in as the regional store person, and eventually he was hired full-time in that position. This position has been renamed as a Material Management Officer. He's always spoke highly of his employment with the department and how his supervisors treated him and his colleagues. When asked about what he thought was the biggest improvement since he began, he would say it was the safety and well-being of all employees. Safety is greatly improved, and the managers have made him feel that his efforts are appreciated and respected. When asked about his future goals, he said it with a smile, helping my real boss operate the Lady Slippers Lodge, formerly Mackenzie Rest Inn, and helping raise their granddaughter. And if given an opportunity, he hopes to get out on their boat more often and maybe get a few rounds of golf in. I'd like to share a few words from his colleagues from the regional office. Mike will be missed here at the compound, not just for what the things he did related to the fire season, but for all the little things. He's always made sure the compound was secure, locking the doors and the gates. Safely was his priority, and you could see him shovel away snow and remove the ice during the winter months. You could see him dig out the snow from the sliding gates early in the morning. He helped us purchase and maintain all their mobile equipment. He made sure the fuel supply was tested and ready for each fire season. Most importantly, he's a great guy with a lot of patience, practical knowledge and experience, and had a few funny stories to tell. Good luck and all the best in your retirement, Mike. You will be sorely missed around the shop. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to use Mike's words. It's been my pleasure to work for this organization for all these years, and will miss the camaraderie and the challenge of the position. Thank you to the entire N.W.T for the opportunity to serve all those years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Nahende. Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, I have a return to oral question asked by the member for Great Slave on March the 30th, 2022, regarding a contingency plan and if the Department of Infrastructure and the contractor are not able to come to an agreement on the Inuvik Airport runway extension and the civil improvement project. The Department of Infrastructure abides by the N.W.T's procurement policies when it comes to considering contractual approaches and making decisions on a negotiated contract. Under our current 11.26 negotiated contract policy, contracts are not negotiated in the under the current 11.26 negotiated contracts policy, contracts are not negotiated in the Legislative Assembly. Only the Executive Council can authorize the negotiation of contracts outside the competitive process, and upon authorization, this process takes place between an authorized eligible contractor and the technical team. Mr. Speaker, the Executive Council reviews each request to negotiate a contract against the established criteria that's in our policy and aims to make decisions and recommendations that provide fair and broad distribution of training, employment, and business opportunities, while also ensuring value for money. Requests to negotiate a contract for projects that receive federal funding may also need to be approved by the Government of Canada, depending on the terms of the funding agreement. This is the case with the Inuvik Airport runway extension and the civil improvement project. The procurement approach must be consistent with obligations that are under the internal and international trade agreements. Both the joint venture and the N.W.T's technical teams have resumed negotiations to be able to determine solutions to the funding gap. At this time, the technical team is focused on options with the objective of realizing a way forward to follow the process outlined in negotiated contracts policy. Should those negotiations be successful, the project will proceed, and should they not be successful, the N.W.T will return to Canada and our Cabinet to be able to discuss potential next steps. The Department of Infrastructure is continually striving to upgrade the infrastructure at the Inuvik Airport to meet changing operational demands and improve the airport's resiliency to a changing climate. While the federal government has committed to provide some additional funding for the project to be able to address inflation and supply chain costs, subject to due diligence, the exact value and timelines are yet unknown. We expect this extension and civil improvements project to create economic opportunities for the region throughout construction. The Department of Infrastructure remains committed to making contracting decisions that will best maximize benefits to local northern Indigenous businesses and residents within available budgets. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, I have a return to oral question asked by the member for Great Slave on March 31st, 2022, regarding my knowledge of a joint venture and Indigenous government. Mr. Speaker, yes, I'm aware of the difference between a joint venture and an Indigenous government. An Indigenous government is one that has negotiated or is in the process of negotiating a self-government agreement with the N.W.T and the Government of Canada, whereas a joint venture is a corporate commercial enterprise undertaken jointly by two or more parties. On the Inuvik Airport runway project, the Government of the Northwest Territories has received bids from a joint venture corporation entity, number 133948883, Canada Incorporated. The joint venture is an eligible contractor as defined under the Negotiated Contracts Policy 11.26 and has the operational, financial, and management potential to undertake the work. Negotiations between the joint venture and the technical team resumed with the objective of realizing a way forward to construction to be able to ensure this project requirements such as surety is in place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Return to oral questions. Return to oral questions. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Colleagues, I would like to draw your attention to visitors in the gallery this afternoon. I am pleased to recognize interns from the Legislative Assembly of Ontario. They are in Yellowknife to increase their knowledge of our consensus style of government. We have with us today, bear with me with the pronunciation, but Janine Ahadidi, pretty close I think. Ikra Mahmood, Alex Horbal, Alicia Rahu, Melody Greaves, Aboon Ali, Sharika Khan, and Tori Llewellyn. Sorry, it's pretty close. Llewellyn. Merci for joining us today. I would like to recognize everyone else in the gallery. I know a couple people left. One just joined us. It is always a pleasure knowing there is much interest in our proceedings. Merci. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's always nice to have kids back in the gallery today, and I'd like to recognize the three pages that we have here in the gallery from Cam Lake, who are Marianne Buma, Aisha Jah, and Justin Quito. Thank you.
Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Thank you. Acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
President, my question is for the Minister of ITI, who was responsible for mining. In the presentation given to committee on April on the 5 sets of mining regulations being developed, it was said that the public engagement on this important work is to take place between May and July. May's almost over, nothing has happened yet. Can the Minister explain this very short timeline for public engagement and how the public can have any meaningful involvement? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for industry, tourism and investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that my title has been corrected. I do feel better standing up with the right name for the right minister. And on this matter, Mr. Speaker, firstly, there are a number of different things happening in terms of what's happening with the Mineral Resources Act regulations. Firstly, with respect to the royalties portion, as the members already mentioned, it's a complex thing that's being developed right now. That element was opened back in February. Comments are welcome until July the 29th for public engagement. That was extended from April the 22nd all the way through to the end of July. With respect to other items, Mr. Speaker, I want to start by referencing the Intergovernmental Council protocol that was developed by and put in place by this government. That really has been the guiding focus of a lot of this work to ensure that when we're making regulations for the North and for the future of the northern mineral resources industry, we're doing that hand in hand with Indigenous governments. As I think was already mentioned during the member's statement, typically regulations don't require the same level of engagement or would often not have any engagement from the public. So we're certainly making an effort to do something quite different here. So in addition to the IGCS process, Mr. Speaker, there is a public engagement step, formal public engagement step, expected to get started here shortly, run through until the summer. In that regard, the items will be posted online. They'll be going through the same typical process that other items do. There's a posting online. People can respond online. They can respond directly. There will be certainly those opportunities similar to any other public engagements that take place. And Mr. Speaker, that said, these are very technical regulations. The folks that would potentially use them, benefit from them, are in this space, operating in this space, know the people to contact. They are already being engaged. They know that this work is underway, and I'm certainly very confident that folks who have those interests have lots of avenues by which to be in touch with us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Framley.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. Let's talk about that public engagement. The Minister committed in April to advising us what research has been done. I found contracts on map staking, legal expertise on dispute resolution, and policy advice from the University of Calgary. Then there's the internal work that the department has already done, apparently. Can the Minister provide a public listing of the research reports completed and when those will be shared with regular MLAs and the public as part of the engagement on these mining regulations? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Framlake. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I said, this is an extremely complex piece of legislation that's going to be enacted, and as a result, the regulations themselves also are unusually complex, and we are always being mindful at every step, again, of the process and of the work that's taking place with the IGCS. Mr. Speaker, I can say, in keeping in mind the rules that we have here in a consensus government, that back on May the 12th, we did provide a list of the research documents completed as of that time to Standing Committee, and certainly if there are documents within that members may wish to have access to, I'd like to be informed. We can certainly provide it to members in keeping with the consensus government's processes around confidentiality as between MLAs and ministers. With respect to the 3 additional contracts that my friend has so diligently sought out, Mr. Speaker, those items I can certainly say I think only of the one with respect to map staking, that one is complete. The others are still in progress, so there's nothing to report on or provide at this point. With respect to the University of Calgary, it's an opportunity to have academic oversight, so that's likely to continue throughout this process. But as for the other 2, as I said, when both are completed, the one is not, but when the other one is, we'll certainly be adding it to the list that I'd already provided to members. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Framlake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. And of course, some of those contracts, there's interim reports that probably could be shared already. But I recognize and support that the development of these regulations is being done with Indigenous governments, but it doesn't substitute or replace public engagement. And I also acknowledge that some of these are complex matters and they require delicate balancing of rights and interests. But this is all the more reason for an informed public debate and information. So can the Minister commit to providing regular and detailed written updates to committee on the progress of the technical working group that is developing these regulations? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Framlake. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in a word, yes, I have found we've appeared in front of Standing Committee now numerous times on both on different parts of the process, the Mineral Resources Act regs generally, but also on royalties specifically. And those are fruitful, they're helpful. In the one case, it resulted in changes to one of the discussion papers. So yes, most certainly, Mr. Speaker, happy to make that commitment. And I want to note, Mr. Speaker, it was pointed out that one of the members of IGCS had attended the briefing. It's not the usual process here that other members would necessarily be speaking at a technical briefing, but we do now have this technical working group that includes IGCS members, and I'm confident that we could, in fact, if done in advance and if planned, we can have an opportunity to have members of that group attend as well in their roles with the IGCS, and that would again likely be of benefit to all parties. So happy to ensure that we can move that forward. And Mr. Speaker, I haven't been put on the spot for this, but I wanted to note at the time of that briefing, MLA specifically asked if we could sit down one-on-one. That also remains an opportunity for all members. I'd be happy to do that and sit down with each of them and the team so that if there's even more technical issues that we can work out, that we'll make that commitment, that we can do that as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Framley.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that, and I will take her up on that commitment. It appears the Minister is going to publicly post 5 sets of detailed mining regulations that cover a variety of matters, including notice of claims, work, royalties, benefits, and disputes. These are all matters of public interest. It's not clear how long people will have to review and comment, whether those comments will be public, and whether there will be responses to the comments and issues that are raised. But can the Minister explain how this public posting process will work and whether comments and responses will also be made public? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, with respect to public engagement, there's a standard position, which is that any operational or any draft regulations get no less than 30 days, and that will certainly be abiding by that guideline. But, Mr. Speaker, it's my intention that we'll be going on for longer than that. It is, as I've been saying and as been said here by others, these are complex regulations. They are going to require more time. So they'll be posted to the engagement website as usual. Information will go out through social media as well as through other more traditional channels. When that happens, notices out as public service announcements will go out. And again, while the guideline is 30 days, I'm confident we'll have certainly more than that for people to give their information in. The comments come in, they're compiled. Then there's the What We Heard reports that get put together. Those too can be shared. And then analyzed and incorporated into the materials shared with our IGCS partners as we move forward. As I say, then that's how they get utilized going forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is extremely important that other levels of government and the general public have their say on potential electricity rate increases. Will the minister responsible for NTPC commit to work with the minister responsible for the Public Utilities Board to have public hearings regarding the impact of increasing electricity rates? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Minister responsible for Northwest Territories Power Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Public Utilities Board develops the review process for the general rate application, and the Public Utility Board schedule allows for a public hearing, if required, on August the 4th to the 5th here in Yellowknife. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Thabacha.
Mr. Speaker, since the Tolson Hydro Project is in the Tolson zone, will the minister ensure that there will not be a one-rate system for power rates and that the people of the Tolson zone will always have lower power rates than other communities because it's a traditional territory of various First Nations and Métis peoples? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Minister responsible for Northwest Territories Power Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In accordance with the electricity rate policy guidelines approved by the N.W.T, since 2010, the electricity rates in the Northwest Territories are set on a zone basis. So each zone, including the Tolston, is to pay rates that reflect costs in the zone. The utilities use a zone of reasonableness to help manage rate transitions. Today, due to these transitions, the Tolston is currently paying less than its costs, but over time the rates will transition to a full cost level. The Tolston rates will be lower than other communities so long as the Tolston cost remains lower than the other communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Thabacha.
Mr. Speaker, after the Tolson expansion is completed, can the minister explain what the cost impacts will be in terms of electricity rates for the people in the Tolson zone and the rest of the Northwest Territories? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabacha. Minister responsible for NTPC.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We recognize that rate implications from the project is an important part of securing broad support to proceed to a construction decision for this long-term project. There are many factors that may impact revenues and in turn rate implications associated with the project. For example, the results of a commercial arrangement between the project partners and the investors, construction conditions imposed as part of the regulatory approvals, and the size of the location of the customer demand. When there is more certainty in these areas, we will be better able to define any potential rate implications that is associated with this project. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Final supplementary. Member for Thabacha.
Mr. Speaker, can the minister tell us when the NTPC will get rid of the current board of NTPC, which is currently occupied by deputy ministers, and be replaced by a new neutral appointed board? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabatcha. Minister responsible for the Northwest Territories Power Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This work is currently led by the EIA. It is my understanding that recommendations are in the final stages for presentation to the existing NTPC board and cabinet. Once they have been reviewed, we will look to engage with standing committee, and then based on feedback and general agreement, implementation this fiscal year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Decho.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the MACA Minister, which is Municipal and Community Affairs. It's related to my statement on the flood situation at Acknowledgements First Nations. It is appreciated that MACA, Health and Social Services, and possibly other departments were on top of the evacuations of the residents and finding accommodations and providing meals. Can the Minister advise if this will be evacuation preparations for any future flooding at Acknowledgements First Nations, Hay River, and other communities? Merci.
Thank you, Member for Decho. Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I answer that question, I'd like to thank the member for his statement. He was bang on. The leadership in Acknowledgements, the chief, did an amazing job. And also the member, we had constant communication throughout this disaster. In regards to the question, so each year the Department of Municipal and Community Affairs reaches out to the affected communities or the ones we feel are affected. We do have plans in place with them. They have their plans, and we look at it. We also, it's about working. We have regional staff that reach out to the leadership and the staff there, and making sure we deal with that there. So again, we also give guidance. If you've seen the preparation and information we got out there, telling residents and what they had to do and get prepared for it, what the communities had to do and what we were preparing to do. In regards to scenarios, we do have tabletop exercises that we're able to use in that, but in reality, until you actually go through this, you find out how good your plan is. And that it's unfortunate, but I think the plans that in both the communities of Hay River and Acknowledgements First Nations, they did a great job. One of the things that we did this year after the last flood, we reached out and looked at the DAPA's disaster assistance policy, and then we updated it. We looked at a cross-jurisdictional reviews to make it sure that what we were able to do is we were more consistent across Canada as well as with the federal government. The other thing is that we created 5 new EMO positions, which will then be working with our superintendents and the leadership in the communities and the regions to do that. We also have created 3 positions at headquarters to help with disasters, whether it's floods, fires, COVID situations like that. So we're always in constant contact with the communities, working with them, and we will be doing an evaluation after we move forward in that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Decho.
Merci, Mr. Speaker, and merci to the Minister for that answer. Mr. Speaker, it is a daunting task for any community to monitor for the changes in river ice flow, ice jamming, melting snow, unknowns such as the perfect storm situation, as was the case at the Fox Farms, Paradise Gardens, West Point First Nations, West Channel, Hay River, and Acknowledgements First Nations, including the Old Village. Can the Minister commit to being the lead department for monitoring, providing warning systems, and working with the communities for possible flood conditions at all known flood zones? Merci.
Thank you, Member for Decho. Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, MACA does connect with the flood risk communities throughout the risk season. We have those communications, and we have, partnership working with them to address these things. We also have the N.W.T alert system in place. In regards to wearing my other hat as ENR Minister, we also publish an N.W.T water monitoring bulletin on a regular basis throughout the flood season. We also make sure that information is available to the leadership in the communities. This approach, though, is again, we have to all understand it's a team approach, and what I mean by that, it's about individuals, communities, governments working together on this disaster. So we do have the lead function on it, but we also rely on municipalities and as well as other government departments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Decho.
Merci, Mr. Speaker, and merci to the Minister. We all know that on a yearly basis we're getting floods, whether it's in different communities, but there's still a flood zone that Hay River's been impacted every year. And all I wanted was the Minister's department to be the lead to help all these communities who are financially strapped and for resources to be the lead monitor. Because as I mentioned before, like KFN was about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, they sounded the siren. It was dark by then. There should have been actions taken before that. And if MACA had stepped up to the plate to help the communities, maybe we wouldn't be in that situation. Many of the evacuees from N.W.T First Nations and surrounding areas were elders and persons with physical disabilities who were provided emergency cots. Of course, this was a last-minute emergency, and people were placed where there were available accommodations. Can the Minister commit his staff to look at placing the elders and persons with physical disabilities in comfortable accommodations as part of flood mitigation efforts? Merci.
Thank you, Member for Decho. Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I answer the question, I need to clarify something. Municipal and Community Affairs is working with the community hand in hand. We were working with the communities before. Our regional staff are working with their staff, and I've been in constant contact with the leadership and having that conversation of what we need to do, how we can work together, and that's the most important aspect about it. The community is the lead, and we are there to support. We as the government of Northwest Territories are all there to help. In regards to the questions the member asked, yeah, we have a process. So when individual, whether it's an elder or mobility issues or young families, they come into the system, like into the evacuation center, we evaluate, we assess it, and we see if the individuals cannot stay in the environment. We were able to, again, work with Health and Social Services. We have a process. We set it up, we look at it, and then we move people if we need to other accommodations. So again, it's about part of our plan. We have it in place. Did we fix it from last year? Yes, but again, it's about a living document, and we're going to be seeing what happened this year and how we can better improve it. So again, I thank the member for this, and yes, we are doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, Member for Decho.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Merci to the Minister for that. Mr. Speaker, I believe the departments are still tallying up costs related to last year's flooding at Jean Marie River and Fort Simpson. We are aware that N.W.T has footed the bill for new builds for Jean Marie River. N.W.T First Nations riverfront homes have been damaged by the flooding and quite possibly are uninhabitable. Will the Minister commit to replacing the damaged homes on the N.W.T First Nations? Merci.
Thank you, Member for Decho. Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
And again, thank you to the member for the question. We're fairly early into the process, so again, we need to identify the level of damages for all the homes. Damage assessments are currently underway, and this information will be utilized to make decisions by the homeowners related to the next steps in the process. I can tell the member that our Pathfinder was in the community of N.W.T on Wednesday, and they were going door to door with the staff there. So we are working on that. Once that is done, we have them make sure they're registered, then the assessors will be in there. We have 7 assessors in to look at the damage in that there. So the N.W.T will coordinate flood recovery for the N.W.T Reserve, and the federal government through Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, CERNAC, and Indigenous Service Canada. So we've already reached out to the federal government in hand with the KFN to make sure we were able to work with them, because it is on a reserve and we need to respect that. It is a government-to-government relationship, and we work with them on that. So we have reached out to that there. Unfortunately, at this point in time, we have yet to have all the information on the recovery reports, but I can guarantee you that I will keep the members from Hay River North, Hay River South, and Decho updated, as well as committee, on the process of it. We're moving forward, as well as the local leadership in the communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yeah, we all know the extent of the damage caused by flooding in Hay River and the reserve and outlying parts of the area as well. And, you know, we were fortunate enough to get the pathway, the Pathfinders in and the assessors in a timely manner, and they did a great job. They were set up in Hay River. They were set up in the arena. A lot of people, attended the arena, and as far as I know, there's approximately 300 applications at this point. So, Mr. Speaker, can the Minister of MACA confirm where the department is with receiving applications and conducting assessments of those impacted by flooding in the South Slave? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
And I thank the member for that. So the member is correct. As soon as it was safe, we had our Pathfinders in. We are working with impacted residents in that. So we are encouraging people to register, whether it's online or into the Hay River Evacuation Center. As I said, we've had people going door to door on the reserve. So we do have Pathfinders in there working on that. So once we get that, then we will have our assessors go in and check out the damages. And so again, it's working in the process. And again, the numbers, I'm not 100% sure. Last number I heard was 100 homes have already been assessed. We've had over 230 people register. And again, that doesn't count KFN, but so we are in the process of working there. Once we have the assessments and that, then the Pathfinders will reach out to the homeowners, and we'll go from there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I understand that in talking with the Pathfinders and the assessors is that they will probably be out of Hay River end of this week. At least the Pathfinders. The assessors may be in there a little bit longer. So I'd ask the minister to confirm, how long the Pathfinders will actually be in Hay River, and the assessors as well. And once they do leave, there will be some people who probably have not registered. So how will those people contact a Pathfinder to register? Will we have somebody stationed in Hay River on a temporary basis? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our Pathfinders are supposed to be there until we finish dealing with this crisis that's happening in Hay River and the reserve. So we are looking at trying to find some local Pathfinders, because right now we have Pathfinders that are outside the community. They are working there. So we're working to try to find local Pathfinders to help that there. I also have to say thank you to the MLA from Hay River North and Hay River South, and to the Decho MLA. they are willing to help out. When they had the conversations, we've given them the information. So I also have reached out to and had the opportunity to talk to the insurance company there in Hay River, and we've shared that information. We've given the information to everybody as much as possible, encouraging people to register there. But if they have problems, to reach out to our MAC office. They will help make sure people register. That's part of our disaster assistance policy. You need to register there. In regards to our assessors, the assessors are going to be there until all the homes are assessed. We have 7 there. We were prepared that we had assessors lined up in case this happened. So we have 7 there. They're there to be there through the whole process. But also I need to really stress the Pathfinders are not just going to disappear. We're still using our Pathfinders for the Little Buffalo, Jean Marie, Fort Simpson, and Fort Good Hope. We still have Pathfinders working with the communities that are still affected from the 2021 floods. So right now they're there, and if residents have a concern, they can reach out to our regional office, to the MLA's office, or even my office. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the number of people that have been impacted in Hay River and the surrounding area is fairly substantial. Some of them have actually taken on and done some of the work themselves in their house just to avoid, advanced mold, causing issues in that. So they've stripped their basements down and then have done quite a bit of work. So, and their houses, many have had their houses assessed already, and now the question that they've been asking, what's next? Like, do we have to wait a week, a month, a year before we hear, where we stand in, what type of reimbursement or what type of, or what costs will be allowed to fix their places? So. And that's what they want. They're ready to start. They're ready to get back in their homes. They want to be back in their homes, and they're ready to bring in contractors. So, Mr. Speaker, will the minister confirm the next steps and timelines in the DAP process, because residents want to start rebuilding? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Last year, my constituents were going through this, as well as Little Buffalo and Fort Good Hope. So I just need to make sure people are aware there are multiple steps. Many of them are occurring at the same time. The N.W.T needs to see the results of the detailed damage assessments to better understand the nature and the extent of the flood damage. More houses are impacted more than others, and same with businesses. Many people have already started their cleanup and repair work and have been in touch with their insurance providers. And we encourage people to start the process as soon as they can. But I also need to really stress is that when people are doing it, take pictures, record, make sure they have the receipts, and then as well record the time that they're working themselves are on there, so we can keep track of that as well. Once the damage assessments are provided to people, they can ask for an advancement. So when we give them the assessment, they can, if they can't afford to do it right away, they can do an advance. So it's up to $10,000, but up to 50% of the assessment. And so when we say $10,000, if it's more expensive for somebody and they don't have the money, we are able to advance it up to 50% there. So, and again, like I said, if they're going to start doing the work, please document it. That's the one thing that I learned from the last flood. Some people didn't start documenting until after, so document, make sure you keep your receipts, and take pictures through the whole process. When I was in the town of Hay River, that's what I was stressing to people. Get to work right away as soon as you can to start dealing with this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, some of the people have actually had insurance, and I know some of the insurance companies have actually already stroked checks for some of the residents who have been impacted, and so it's people that are going to be relying on government assistance through the DAP, are wondering, how soon they're going to see money, and to provide that support, because a lot of people just don't have the funds sitting in their bank account to proceed. So I'd ask the minister, when can people expect to see those advance payments, and how are those advance payments going to be calculated? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Haver South. Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in regards to that question there, the process is that the assessors will come in, they will do the assessment of the damage, then the pathfinders will reach out to the impacted homeowner, business owner, and explain what the assessment is, then also have that conversation about, do they need an advance, do they need this here, and then when we are then through the process, it's basically 7 to 10 days once we process the advance. So again, it's about asking people to be a little bit patient right now as we go through the process. Once we have the assessments done, we explain and have that conversations with the homeowner, the business owner, then we would be able to get the advance going into the system, and it takes 7 to 10 days, and that's what the process was last year, and it's really, it's quick. It's usually 30 days with the Financial Management Board, but the Department of Finance has been very cooperative in helping us address the situation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Mumphrey.
Thank you. On May 18, 2022, Government of the Northwest Territories and Klitscho government signed a memorandum of understanding on housing that commits both government to a formal framework for intergovernmental cooperation on housing. Can the minister responsible for housing Northwest Territories share the key elements of the framework? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Mumphrey. Minister responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we did sign an agreement with the Klitscho government. I can have that document available for the member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Mumphrey.
Can the Minister for Housing N.W.T share the vision and goals of the framework, how this MOU will change the current housing situation faced by the people in Klitscho region? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Mumphrey. Minister responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The intent of the agreement is for both governments to be working in collaboration together and addressing the housing issues in the Klitscho area. The agreement is a fair agreement, a considerable agreement between both governments. We are working towards establishing the working group as well too for housing in that region. The Northwest Territories as well, the Indigenous governments have received distinction-based funding. So through this agreement, we're trying to understand what is our responsibility when we are addressing housing in the smaller communities. It is a significant amount. We do have the expertise within housing N.W.T, and this is a respectful agreement to making sure that we both meet the priorities of the regions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Mumphrey.
Can the minister responsible for N.W.T housing provide information from the framework on the sale of housing N.W.T assets like houses and units? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Mumphrey. Minister responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Right now, Housing N.W.T is going through our mortgage files, and I wanted to make sure that we are able to close those files by the end of this government. But unfortunately, we are experiencing a lot of arrears within those mortgage files. We have approximately 247, and 207 of those files are experiencing arrears. And then 115 out of the 247, the clients are either paying on a regular basis or periodically. We did announce that each of the public housing units are for sale. Through that, we are going through our programming to making sure that we are not setting up the clients for failure, but really looking at their eligibility and really wanting to see success amongst our public housing clients should we be able to sell the public housing units to our tenants. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Mumphrey.
Well, if the minister wants to do something about it, they can transfer the unit. If she wants to do something about the arrears, they can transfer the unit to the tenants living in there, be a homeowner, and bring other programs like home assistance program back. But anyways, Mr. Speaker, can the minister responsible for housing N.W.T provide information from the framework on the transfer of housing unit ownership from housing N.W.T to long-term tenants? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Mumphrey. Minister responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I hear the members' passion as well too. I would like to see a lot of the housing units transferred over to the clients, but we are experiencing difficulties within the transfer. We're looking at the environmental, the condition of the units, the health and safety of the units as well too, and the liability. But it doesn't stop us from continuing to work with those tenants as well. And as of today, I think we've received approximately 150 applications that are wanting public housing to be sold to the tenants, and I will keep the member informed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions, like I said in my member statement, are for the Minister of Infrastructure. The 468-kilometre section of the Dempster Highway is currently the area I'm talking about in the Yukon. Can the Minister provide an update if there's been any discussions with the Yukon government about improving the Dempster Highway, in particular to that section of the highway? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have discussed the need for investment on the Dempster Highway across the border. You know, I've been hearing concerns from the people that are having to drive that part of the Dempster that, you know, it needs some work. So we have ongoing discussions with the Yukon's Minister of Transportation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if possible, will the Minister, within these talks with the Yukon, possibly do a joint submission to Canada for dollars to improve the Yukon section of the Dempster Highway? As I mentioned, it's an awful highway when you have to use it for transportation out of our region. We've got the Mackenzie Delta, the N.W.T, both Inuvik constituencies. They continuously travel out that road. That's the only road out of the Beaufort Delta. It brings in all of our food, our fuel, our supplies. We don't have, you know, that is a lifeline for us. I drove into Yellowknife. All the highways into Hay River, Enterprise here are chip sealed, they're beautiful. People around here may not think they're beautiful. Drive the Yukon portion of the Dempster Highway. You will think they are beautiful. So will this minister commit to putting in a joint application or work with her counterpart to do that? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to know that the rest of the highways are in excellent condition, and therefore we need to work. I agree with the member. You know, I drive that highway too. Same with yourself, Mr. Speaker. So, you know, yes, we will continue to make efforts to be able to have a joint submission with the Yukon. So we're having that discussion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll correct myself. Maybe they're not that wonderful, but like I said, if you drive the Dempster Highway, even that section from Betchacote to Yellowknife is a lot nicer than the section from Will the minister also mention that there, when in these discussions, to include improvements being made to these bridges? As I mentioned in my member statement, the bridge that you first cross when you hit the Dempster Highway is a single-lane wooden bridge, and this limits what can go up and down that highway. And if we were to able to get the federal dollars to change that bridge out, maybe that could try and solve some of our housing issues, because we could pull up modulars through there. So will the minister commit to adding those into this joint submission with, or having that discussion? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sorry, I'm just trying to look at what the member is saying. I understand the member's concern about I know exactly which bridge she's referring to, and it does have weight restrictions, which really doesn't allow much fuel equipment coming up to the on Dempster Highway. So yeah, we will have that discussion on the bridge. I think that's an important piece of infrastructure that we need to get to work with the Yukon government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, final supplementary, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The only last commitment I'd ask is if the minister could just follow up with me when she's going to be meeting with the minister responsible for infrastructure and what their plan is, because this is something, I mean, this highway has been there since 1979, and I don't know if that other side of the highway has been touched much. So I think it's end of life, and it really needs to be looked at. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely. I'll keep the member informed on some of the discussions that we will be having. I just want to note that Minister Algebra, who's the Federal Minister of Transportation, is planning a visit to the Northwest Territories this summer. So I plan to see if I could get him up to the Beaufort Delta to see some of the problems that we are having with infrastructure, including some of the effects on climate change and the need for investment on the Yukon side of the Dempster. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Excuse me. Oral questions, member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm so excited about the road conversation. I kind of want to throw my questions out the window and keep at the Minister of Infrastructure, but I'm going to move on to the Minister of Housing. My first question is around the recently purchased Nordic Arms. Could the Minister tell me if any public or housing clients have been moved into that unit as of today? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We haven't moved any tenants into the Nordic Arms. We did do a technical assessment of the building and found there needs to be some repairs to the building. And we're scheduling this work to be done as soon as possible, but there is coordination done right now, being done right now with the current tenants of that building. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions, member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would really love if the Minister could share that technical assessment with the Standing Committee so that we could have a look at it as well. Next, my question is, recently the federal government has announced that there is more funding for N.W.T housing in our communities. Can the Minister speak to what these announcements are going to mean for the people in our communities in our territory? How many actual new houses are we going to see with the announcement that the Fed's made? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for that question. As of right now, we haven't finalized the agreement with Canada, so I can't commit to be sharing any of those details yet until we actually see what is going to be asked for this funding and if there's going to be any expectations, I guess, of how we are to spend it. But I want to take this opportunity to also just highlight the work that I've been doing with the National Co-Investment Fund. The Housing Corporation did invest into a navigator. Sorry, I'm not too sure of the title. I can't think of it right now for the individual. She has been doing amazing work with CMHC. As of today, the Family Support Centre has submitted an application of project value of $3.7 million for 14 units. Habitat Humanity has also submitted as well too. We're going to be seeing 10 new home ownership units. Avens Society as well too, 102 units expansion. And Borealis Co-op, 50 units for affordable housing for families. And Spruce Bough, we have supported that application going forward as well too, 640,000. The Nahanni Butte Dena Band has also submitted to create 10 new units, bachelor and one-bedroom market rentals. YWCA has also been successful with their application for 21 units for 33 beds, supporting housing and women and children. N.W.T Community Services, Northern United Place, they submitted for a project value of $6 million. And also N.W.T Disabilities has also submitted an application for a co-investment and looking at a De Beers Legacy project as well too. And just recently announced in the media, we do have a successful application with Delaney for 10 more units in the community. So housing has really emphasized on the opportunity with the federal announcements and with the federal funding that is there. We're working very strongly with the federal government to getting more houses in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm really glad to hear all of that. I'm glad to hear actual numbers of units, including the YWCA. I think the Minister knows I've always been a strong proponent of the work that they do. I'm going to just throw the Minister a bit of a curveball here and ask, how is she ensuring that while this work is being done, that we are ensuring that northern manufacturers are having the ability to participate in this work? I know that there's been an ongoing conversation around foundation designs and basically RFPs scoping out northern businesses by being very specific in what they're dictating. So can the Minister speak to how she's going to ensure that northern manufacturers get a portion of some of this new money that's been announced by the federal government? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the unit delivery, I'm emphasizing on northern businesses to benefit from the 90-unit delivery and also for the co-investment applications and really trying to bridge those relationships. We do have our units going out for public tender. We did have Indigenous groups, governments, approach us as well and wanting to know, they wanted to be acknowledged what is being built in our community and looking at further opportunities. So we have been engaging with the northern manufacturers as well too. We're looking at stick build. We're looking at every idea throughout the territories to maximize on this benefit and getting houses into these communities a lot faster. I'm really hoping to see that 2023 will be a strong construction season and creating employment in small communities and apprenticeship opportunities as well too. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her responses, and she knows that we'll all be holding her to task about those comments. My last question is just a little bit of a side tangent as well, but recently I was in Fort Simpson, and I noted that there were a couple units there that were under construction that had been impacted recently by fire. And when I spoke with people in town, they told me that they were RCMP housing that was being constructed by the Housing Corp. So my understanding is that due to this vandalism, the work has stopped, and I'm just wondering if the Minister can provide us with an update on what's happening there and what happens from a fiscal standpoint when we don't fulfill the or the N.W.T doesn't fulfill the contract to the RCMP for the delivery of those units on time. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for this question, but there is further details that is with the Department of Justice right now that we are working very closely with them, and there are further details that I would rather just follow up with the member on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Right now, about half of our climate change reduction targets in the 2030 energy strategy and our climate change strategic framework are dependent on us building the Tulston Hydro expansion. And I am looking forward to the department releasing the business case on that sometime in the near future. But my understanding is, in order for that to happen, we need about $750 million from the feds. We need about $250 million of our own money. We need an increase in our debt ceiling. We need 3 new mines to exist around the lake. We need the support of Indigenous governments. And if all of those things line up, we might just build Tolston in time for 2030. That's a pretty tight regulatory turnaround and construction timeline to meet our energy targets. I actually hope all of those things come together in the next 8 years here, Mr. Speaker. But my question is, considering this is about half of our current targets for reductions, what is the plan if we don't build Tolston? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advancing the Tolston Hydro expansion project remains a priority of this government, and we will continue to work to advance this transformative project with our Indigenous partners. This project has significant potential to help stabilize the cost of energy, grow our economy, and reduce industrial and transportation sector emissions. There is no single project other than this Tolston that can have the same level of impact in this regard. It is a key component of our vision to reduce our dependence on diesel and transition to lower carbon economy. The role that a project such as the Tolston play in our future ability to meet territorial emissions targets is dependent on when the project comes online. As we move forward with renewed action plans under the 2030 energy strategy, our actions will be adjusted as needed to reflect the timing of when larger projects such as the Tolston comes online. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was hoping we could at least somewhat acknowledge that there's a world where this billion-dollar project doesn't happen, and we have put some thought in how to meet our climate targets. Additionally, when you look at the 2030 energy strategy, all of the reductions in there are actually with us building a transmission line to the diamond mines, so they are in hydro. But I'm pretty sure when we get this business case, Phase 1, which is the expansion of the dam, Phase 2, which is connecting the north and south grids, are well past 2030 already, and the possibility of actually going into the diamond mines is a much bigger question mark. So my question is when we finally get the business case to be public, will the minister go back to the number in the energy strategy and maybe attribute what is actually realistic for Tolston to accomplish? Because I don't think it's realistic to just say that by 2030 we're going to have all our diamond mines on hydro from Tolston. I think that's just simply misleading the public in that current energy strategy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, work is underway to assess some of the different emission reduction targets above and beyond our existing 2030 commitments, including update federal climate targets. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't even know what.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this brings me to my next question, which is that, the targets that I think we've set out are unrealistic, yet the fact is we are using 30% below 2005 levels for 2030. The federal government has recently changed to 40 to 45% below 2005 levels by 2030. It was previous N.W.T policy to always follow and mirror the federal target. Now all of our documents are at a much lower rate, and we don't even seem on path to meet them. So my question is, are we going to amend the climate change strategic framework and the energy strategy to once again follow what the federal target for greenhouse gas emissions is? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Yellowknife North, Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To be blunt, no. We need to understand the technical feasibility and the economic implications of the various emissions reduction pathways. One thing is clear, Mr. Speaker, without new initiatives and significant additional federal funding support, we will be challenged to be able to meet our existing targets, and reaching higher targets will not be possible. We expect this modeling work to be completed this fiscal year and inform the 5-year renew of the 2030 energy strategy, which is scheduled to commence in 2023. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Right now in our 2030 energy strategy, under the long-term section, there's one small reference to small nuclear reactors, and there's yet to be one licensed in Canada, as is noted in our strategy. But the federal government has recently announced an action plan for developing small nuclear reactors. I've heard many in industry talk about this as a potential solution. I'm just wondering if the Minister could update the House whether the N.W.T is doing any work in this area, or whether further plans will develop on the potential of small nuclear reactors. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As part of the 2030 energy strategy, the N.W.T is committed to monitor emerging technologies, such as a small nuclear reactor. In fact, when developing the strategy, we heard from the public that in order to be a good solution in the Northwest Territories, small modular reactors need to be technically viable, reliable, cost-effective, and most importantly, there must be public and community acceptance. As the small modular reactors are yet to be commercially available, the N.W.T continues to monitor the development of this technology, also to participate in federal, provincial, territorial working groups on this matter. We will continue to do this moving forward, as well as continue to collaborate with other northern jurisdictions to study and access the feasibility of deploying small modular reactors here in the north. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Yellowknife North. Okay, thank you. Oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Can't see if my light's on. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions today are in regards to the Child and Youth Care Counselor Program. I note that we're about just over 2 years into the new way that schools are being able to bring child and youth care counselors into their schools, and so I'm wondering if Cabinet can speak to what kind of feedback or review process Health has undertaken with schools to evaluate this program, and how are the CYCCs collaborating with teaching staff to provide that feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
I didn't hear it.
Member for Cam Lake, can you please repeat your question? Thank you.
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I was just noting that we're 2 years into the Child and Youth Care Counselor Program, and I was wondering what kind of feedback or review process Health has undertaken with schools to evaluate this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is we're now in phase 4 of the CYCC program, so we are in fact planning to evaluate it in this fiscal year. So it's a two-part process. The first part is underway now and before the end of the school year, and it is really addressed to educators and people who may not be in the job in the fall. The second part is with service users and with others who have interacted with this system. So I'm confident that it will be a robust evaluation and that it will include who's using the service, what's the balance between children and community use of the service, whether the service received is acceptable to the people using it. Those are the kinds of things that we're going to dig into so that we can make any improvements that people tell us about to make the program stronger. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to request that teachers be made part of that process. Some of the feedback that I'm hearing is that there's definitely a feeling of an iron wall in some instances between the teaching staff and the health and social services staff. And so there is a desire to have a collaborative process of how to support students in the classroom if there is ways for teachers to better support their students. So I'd just like to leave that there. But I'm wondering if the minister can speak to the number of CYCC vacancies that currently exist across the territory. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the Detroit region, there are no vacancies. In the Clecho region, there is one vacancy in N.W.T with a competition in progress. In the Satu, there are no vacancies. Oh, no, I beg your pardon. There's one in Fort Good Hope with a competition in progress. In the Beaufort Delta, there is a vacancy in Ulahaktuk, and there is a vacancy that looks like a verbal offer has been accepted in Tuck, so that position has been filled. Yellowknife region, looks like everything's filled. South Slave, one vacancy in Fort Smith. Hay River, positions are filled. Fort Resolution position is filled. And Little there is a vacant position and a competition is in progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that response. So that response is great news. Currently on the careers website, there are still advertisements out for some of the regions where all the vacancies have been filled, just of note to the Minister. This past week, we celebrated here at the Legislative Assembly 15 new Indigenous councillors that just finished their 2-year diploma program. And so I'm wondering if these brand new Indigenous councillors will be offered CYCC positions within our schools or with the Department of Health and Social Services. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to say again how proud I am of that program and the people who finished it. We have supported this program from its inception, and we created the Addictions Aftercare fund so that community governments, Indigenous governments could hire the Indigenous wellness workers to work for them directly. I don't have information how many of those positions have been taken up by the Indigenous and community governments at this point. The wellness workers are welcome to apply for any job that is advertised by the N.W.T, but we are not making offers outside of the regular staffing process. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we hear in committee quite often is this desire for some more transparency around equivalencies. And this program, I praise Health and Social Services for their support of the program and their support also through the Aftercare Fund as well in providing people with access to that funding in order to provide employment beyond the program. But I'm wondering if Health and Social Services will increase the transparency of the equivalencies within their job descriptions so that people know what equivalencies will be accepted by the Department of Health and Social Services so that they can use experience that they can gain in this program to then apply for positions that traditionally call for master's degrees within the N.W.T. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to the member for that suggestion. I'll take that up.
Thank you, Minister. Colleagues, our time for oral questions has expired. Written questions. Written questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are around negotiated contracts and are for the Premier. The negotiated contracts policy allows the government to negotiate contracts outside the competitive contract process. The policy also requires the government to disclose some information on its negotiated contracts, but not enough for this House to assess whether each negotiated contract is serving its purpose. To deliver benefits that competitive contracting wouldn't, or to build capacity of northern businesses. Please provide a list of all negotiated contracts awarded by or completed for the Government of the Northwest Territories in the 19th Assembly, and 1. For each negotiated contract that was completed in the 19th Assembly or multi-year over the course of the 19th Assembly, please indicate A. the department or agency that awarded the contract, B. the contractor's name or names, C. the scope of contract, D. the total contract value, E. the fiscal year of the contract if multi-year, F. the duration of the contract, G. the specific benefits analysis, H. the statement on the specific benefits achieved, including quantitative and qualitative data in support of that statement if completed. I, whether the minister responsible provided written consent to further assign or subcontract the contract, in whole or in part, or to provide substitute personnel for the purposes of performing the services beyond the original awarded contract. J, the total estimated premium, if available. K, the significant extent, if known, to which the contract involved a subcontractor or partner not eligible under the negotiated contracts policy. And L, the public notice of the awarding of the negotiated contract and the reasons for negotiating the contract rather than awarding the contract through a competitive contracting process. 2, in addition, for each negotiated contract that was awarded in the 19th Assembly but is not yet complete, please provide A, the department or agency that awarded the contract, B, the contractor's name or names, C, the scope of the contract, D, the total contract value, E, the fiscal year of the contract if multi-year, F, the duration of the contract, G, whether the minister responsible provided written consent to further assign or subcontract the contract, in whole or in part, or to provide substitute personnel for the purposes of performing the services beyond the original awarded contract. H, the significant extent, if known, to which the contract involved a subcontractor or partner not eligible under the negotiated contracts policy. I, the public notice of the awarding of the negotiated contract and the reasons for negotiating the contract, rather than awarding the contract through a competitive contracting process. And 3, finally, please also provide the guidelines and other directions that the Executive Council has established to implement the negotiated contracts policy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Written questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, I have a return to written question 40-19-2 asked by the member for Untitled to the Honourable Minister responsible for the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation on March 31st, 2022 regarding housing expenditures in the Untitled communities. And Mr. Speaker, I have a return to written question 41-19-2 asked by the member for Inuvik Twin Lakes to the Minister of Infrastructure on March 31st, 2022 regarding the Inuvik Airport Runway Expansion Project. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Replies to the Commissioner's address. Replies to the Commissioner's address. Petitions. Petitions. Colleagues, we'll call a short recess. Thank you, colleagues. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, your committee would like to report on its consideration of Bill 40, an act to amend the Medical Profession Act. Bill 40 received second reading in the Legislative Assembly on November 26, 2021, and was referred to the Standing Committee on Social Development for review. Near the end of the committee's 120-day review period, the Government of the Northwest Territories Department of Health and Social Services identified issues with the bill that could require substantial amendments. On March 28, 2022, the committee sought and received an extension of our review period and indicated that we were willing to work collaboratively with the Minister of Health and Social Services to make improvements to the bill. On May 19, 2022, the Standing Committee held a public hearing with the Minister of Health and Social Services and completed its clause-by-clause review of the bill. 10 motions were carried by the committee and concurred with by the Minister. The committee thanks the Minister and Department for their hard work and collaboration to improve this bill. Mr. Speaker, the committee reports that Bill 40, an act to amend the Medical Profession Act, is ready for consideration in Committee of the Whole as amended and reprinted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Member for Decho.
Mr. Speaker, your committee would like to report on its consideration of Bill 46, an act to amend the Motor Vehicles Act. Bill 46 received second reading in the Legislative Assembly on March 9, 2022, and was referred to the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment for review. The Standing Committee held a public hearing on May 10, 2022, and completed its clause-by-clause review of the bill with the Minister of Infrastructure on May 25, 2022. Mr. Speaker, the committee reports that Bill 46, an act to amend the Motor Vehicles Act, is ready for consideration in Committee of the Whole. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Decho. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee would like to report on its consideration of Bill 47, an act to amend the Employment Standards Act No. 2. Bill 47 received second reading in the Legislative Assembly on March 28, 2022, and was referred to the Standing Committee on Social Development for review. On May 10, 2022, the Standing Committee held a public hearing with the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment and completed its clause-by-clause review of the bill. Mr. Speaker, the committee reports that Bill 47, an act to amend the Employment Standards Act No. 2, is ready for consideration in Committee of the Whole. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of standing and special committees. Member for Yellowknife North.
Mr. Speaker, your Standing Committee on Government Operations is pleased to provide its report on the review of the Languages Commissioner for the Northwest Territories Annual Report 2020-2021 and commends it to the House. I believe I got about 6 pages here to go, Mr. Speaker, so bear with me. Introduction. The Standing Committee on Government Operations has reviewed the 2020-21 Annual Report of the Languages Commissioner. The Official Languages Act requires the Commissioner prepare an annual report. The report includes information on the number of complaints filed. It can also include recommendations. The Speaker tables the report in the Legislative Assembly. Once tabled, committee reviews the report. As part of the review, the Languages Commissioner, Ms. Brenda Gauthier, appeared before the committee on February 17, 2022. She delivered an excellent presentation on our 2020-2021 annual report. The committee commends her work and the relocation of the Office of the Official Languages Commissioner to Fort Smith, as well as her work building relations to understand and promote language rights. The committee appreciated her timely and insightful comments on the ongoing statutory review of the Official Languages Act. This report presents 3 recommendations to strengthen the role of the Languages Commissioner. The committee is pleased to submit these recommendations to the Government of the Northwest Territories and looks forward to their implementation. Statutory review of the Official Languages Act. Over the past year, the committee has been working on a separate statutory review of the Official Languages Act. The statutory review allows the committee to examine how the Act is working and for the public to provide input on what could be done better. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has slowed committee's work. The committee held public meetings in Inuvik in June 2021 and a virtual meeting in January 2022. At these meetings, stakeholders provided excellent input on how the official languages could be better preserved, protected, and empowered to thrive. The committee is grateful for these thoughtful contributions, which will inform the committee's final report. The committee intends more travel beyond Yellowknife to collect feedback from speakers of other languages. This includes public hearings currently scheduled in Fort Smith, N.W.T First Nation, Hay River, and Fort Providence over June 22nd to 24th. The committee is grateful for all stakeholders' contributions. The public's feedback will help the committee make recommendations to strengthen all language communities in the N.W.T. The committee continues to advocate for the N.W.T to pass legislation to improve the Official Languages Act in the life of this 19th Assembly. Commissioner's ability to get responses. The Languages Commissioner has made one recommendation in her 2020-21 annual report regarding her ability to get responses. She recommended that the Legislative Assembly develop a formal process for responding back to the Office of the Language Commissioner on recommendations presented by the Office. The process should include that response be in writing and that there be a specific timeline for response. This is a long-standing recommendation. It has appeared in the same or similar language in each of the Language Commissioner's past 6 annual reports going back to 2015. The Official Languages Act guides 2 ways the Languages Commissioner can make recommendations. Recommendations to the Legislative Assembly. The Commissioner can make recommendations in an annual report on the proposed changes to the Act. The annual report is then tabled in the Legislative Assembly and referred to a committee. The committee is required to review the annual report and report back within 180 days of the referral. Recommendations to a public body. The Commissioner can make recommendations to the head of a public body to take action after an investigation. The Commissioner may request a status update from the public body within a specified timeframe. The public body is not required to respond. In her appearance before committee, the Languages Commissioner clarified that she is primarily concerned with the response of public bodies. She explained that the challenges with receiving responses from the government to her recommendations. The committee shares the Commissioner's concerns. The Languages Commissioner specified 3 priority areas where the N.W.T should be more responsive to her office. These priority areas form the basis of committee's recommendations to the N.W.T in this report. Recommendation. The Languages Commissioner stated that she finds her role to communicate with the minister responsible for official languages is blurred. She added she is unclear on the roles and responsibilities between herself and the minister. The Official Languages Act is silent on the relationship between the Languages Commissioner and the minister responsible for official languages. Whereas the Act includes provisions that specify how the Languages Commissioner may make recommendations to ministers and deputy ministers and the Legislative Assembly, no such powers exist for recommendations to the minister responsible for official languages. Further, the Act requires that the minister responsible for official languages to consider recommendations made by the Official Languages Board and the Aboriginal Languages Revitalization Board. But the Act says nothing about the minister considering recommendations from the Languages Commissioner. Therefore, the Standing Committee on Government Operations recommends Recommendation 1, that the Department of Education, Culture and Employment clarify the role of the Languages Commissioner, specifically regarding how the Languages Commissioner may bring forward concerns and recommendations to the minister responsible for official languages. The Languages Commissioner pointed out that she lacks powers to compel the disclosure of information from public bodies in investigations. While she indicated that all departments have been cooperative with her to date, she is concerned by the lack of tools to deal with non-cooperation. Other statutory officers have confirmed that public bodies do not always cooperate with investigations. The Information and Privacy Commissioner highlighted the issue in his 2020-21 annual report. When the IPC conducts a review under the Health Information Act, Section 153, Sub 2, requires the N.W.T to provide the requested information within 14 days. The Information and Privacy Commissioner has reported that this response time is frequently not met. The IPC's difficulty accessing requested records undermines the public interest in timely, comprehensive reviews of government decisions, actions, or failures to act on access and correction requests. Unlike the Languages Commissioner, other N.W.T statutory officers that conduct reviews and investigations have significant powers to compel the disclosure of requested records. The Information and Privacy Commissioner can require the production of relevant records within a time limit. The Ombudsman can require a person to produce a document related to an investigation subject to certain restrictions. The Ombudsman can also summon and examine under oath any person whom she believes is able to give information relevant to an investigation, subject to certain restrictions. The Human Rights Commission can demand the production of documents and records that are relevant to a human rights complaint, subject to certain restrictions. If the demand is not met, the Human Rights Commission can apply to the Supreme Court for an order to enforce compliance. The committee believes the Language Commissioner should have similar powers to require production of relevant records when she carries out an investigation. Therefore, the Standing Committee on Government Operation recommends the Department of Education, Culture and Employment strengthen the Languages Commissioner's ability to get requested information from public bodies, including time-bound requirements to respond to requests. The Languages Commissioner highlighted that when she puts recommendations to public bodies, they are not, in fact, required to respond. The Official Languages Act merely allows the Languages Commissioner to request a notification of action, if any, that the public body proposes to take to give effect to her recommendations. The committee believes these provisions are weak. As the Languages Commissioner stated in her annual report, the only power the Languages Commissioner has is to make recommendations. If the recommendations are ignored, it calls into question whether the office has any real purpose. The committee agrees with the Languages Commissioner's concerns. Her limited authority to monitor and assess the implementation of recommendations undermines her ability to carry out her mandate, namely, to take all actions and measures within her authority with a view to ensuring recognition of the rights, status, and privileges of each of the official languages in compliance with the spirit and intent of the Official Languages Act in the administration of the affairs of government institutions. Public bodies should face more stringent duties to respond to recommendations from the Languages Commissioner. The Standing Committee on Government Operations therefore recommends Recommendation 3. The Department of Education, Culture and Employment impose time-bound requirements on public bodies to respond to recommendations from the Languages Commissioner. Conclusion. This concludes the Standing Committee on Government Operations report on the review of the Languages Commissioner for the Northwest Territories Annual Report 2020-2021. The committee looks forward to the government's response to these recommendations. Recommendation 4, the Standing Committee on Government Operations recommends that the government of the Northwest Territories provide a response to this report within 120 days. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Member for Yellowknife North.
Mr. Speaker, I move, second by the Honourable Member for Thabatra, that Committee Report 29-19 Sub 2, Standing Committee on Government Operations, report on the review of the Languages Commissioner for the Northwest Territories, Annual Report 2020-2021, be received by the Assembly and referred to Committee of the Whole. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Committee Report 29 is referred to Committee of the Whole. Reports of Standing and Special Committees. Reports of Standing and Special Committees. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document. Follow-up letter for oral question 905-19(2), COVID-19 Community Mental Health Resources. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document. Follow-up letter for oral questions 898-19(2), Internet access to students. Do I go on? Yeah. Keep going? Okay. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Premier, I wish to table the following 5 documents. The follow-up letter for oral questions 904-19(2), Emerging Stronger and Economic Recovery. A follow-up letter for oral questions 962-19(2), Emerging Stronger, N.W.T Economic Recovery Plan. Follow-up letter for oral questions 1005-19(2), Fuel Costs. Follow-up letter for oral questions 1024-19(2), Fuel Costs. Do I say the number or do I? Okay. Follow-up letter for oral question 1024-19 brackets 2. Regulation making in the Northwest Territories, and a follow-up letter for oral question 1027-19 bracket 2. Ukraine support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for Housing N.W.T.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following two documents: a follow-up letter for oral questions 932-19 bracket 2, housing; follow-up letter for oral question 933-19 bracket 2, housing partnerships. Mr. Speaker, further to my return to written questions 40-19 bracket 2, I wish to table the following document: housing expenditures in Tuinaday-Welladay communities. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following 5 documents: the Government of the Northwest Territories response to Committee Report 22-19 bracket 2, Report on Telecommunications; Government of the Northwest Territories response to Committee Report 23-19 bracket 2, Report on the review of 2018-19 and 2019-20 public accounts; Government of the Northwest Territories response to Committee Report 21-19 bracket 2, Report on the Government of the Northwest Territories approach to the mining fiscal regime review; Northwest Territories Business Development and Investment Corporation 22-23 corporate plan; and Annual Report 2021-2022, Northwest Territories Office of the Regulator of Oil and Gas Operations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Colleagues, in accordance with Section 21 brackets 1 of the Retiring Allowances Act and Section 11.1 of the Supplementary Retiring Allowances Act, I hereby table the Northwest Territories Legislative Assembly Pension Administration Report, Retiring Allowances Act and Supplementary Retiring Allowances Act at March 31st, 2021. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Notice is a motion. Notice is a motion. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I give notice that on Monday, April 4, 2022, I will move the following motion. Now, therefore, I move seconded by the Honourable Member for the Batcha that the following member be removed as an alternate to the Standing Committee on Social Development, Mr. Jackie Jacobson, the member for N.W.T. And further, that the following member be appointed as an alternate to the Standing Committee on Social Development, Mr. Rocky Simpson, the member for Hay River South. And furthermore, that the following member be appointed to the Standing Committee on Social Development and Government Operations, Mr. Richard Ajericon, member for Tuinaday-Welladay. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Notice is a motion. Notice is a motion. Motions. Motions. Notice is a motion for the first reading of bills. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I give notice that on Monday, May the 30th, 2022, I will present Bill 52, Elevators and Lifts Act, to be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lifts. Lifts. Thank you, Minister. Notice is a motion for the first reading of bills. Minister responsible for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I give notice that on Monday, May 30th, 2022, I will present Bill 53, an act to amend the Liquor Act, to be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Notice is a motion for the first reading of bills. Notice is a motion for the first reading of bills. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration in Committee of the Whole of Bills and Other Matters. Bill 23, Bill 29, Committee Report 27-19 brackets 2 with member for Inuvik Twin Lakes signature.
I now call Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of committee? Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. I move that the chair rise and report progress.
Does committee agree? We'll now rise and report progress. Thank you.
May I please have the report of Committee of the Whole. Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering Bill 23, Bill 29, Committee Report 27-19-2, and would like to report progress. And Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of Committee of the Whole be concurred with. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Do we have a seconder? Member for Nahende. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Mr. Clerk, orders of the day.
Orders of the day for Friday, May 27th, 2022, 10 a.m. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, returns to oral questions, recognition of visitors in the gallery, acknowledgements, oral questions, returns to written questions, replies to commissioner's address, petitions, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents, notices of motion, motions, notices of motion for first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration in committee of the whole of bills and other matters, bills 23 and 29, committee report 27-19-2, report of committee of the whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. This House stands adjourned until Friday, May 27th, 2022 at 10 a.m.